When talking about upgrading programs for tanks, it normally revolves around modern MBTs that are getting the very latest in technological improvements. But the Vietnamese People's Army, VPA for short, is implementing such a program to upgrade some very old tanks in order to keep them viable. The VPA operate an estimated 850 T-54-55s and another 350 Type 59s, the Chinese-built copy. These tanks form the majority of the VPA's tank fleet and have seen a great deal of use. Though our image of the Vietnam War is often of infantry and helicopters, armour saw extensive use after the withdrawal of the majority of US forces. In 1971, 72, and in the final battles of the war in 1975, the T-54-55s were extremely active, with substantial armoured clashes occurring between the forces of North and South Vietnam. The tanks were also a key feature in Vietnam's subsequent wars in Cambodia and against China in the late 1970s. But, as the dates indicate, these tanks are getting on in age. Upgrades to the T-54-55 are hardly a new thing, with the Israelis developing the Tiran series of updates about the same time as North Vietnamese tanks were battling their southern counterparts. But the Vietnamese are the latest to initiate a program to keep these old battle wagons viable. Designated as the T-54M, these tanks have seen major upgrade work. The primary change is in the fire control system. The T-54M has the old TPN night sight replaced with a Spanish-made Indra TIFCS 3BU. This provides automatic aiming, thermal imaging for night fighting, and can be operated by the commander or gunner. In terms of improving combat effectiveness, this is without doubt the most important aspect on the T-54Ms. The upgrade also reportedly sees the fitting of a new hydraulic power steering system. The T-54-55 is considered quite a nice tank to drive in comparison to many of its contemporaries from the 1950s, but no doubt this addition will be welcome to the VPA drivers. Some sources report the fitting of new engines, but that doesn't seem to be the case. The old Model 55 diesel that is used in the T-54-55 is primitive in comparison to modern engines, but that is not necessarily a disadvantage. It is simple, robust, and parts are easily made and available. Its retention would make sense, though perhaps upgraded to compensate for increased vehicle weight. Visually, the biggest change is in the tank's armour layout. The distinctive rounded turret is now covered with an applique protection system that adds considerable bulk. Smaller armour boxes are also fitted to the glacis plate. Most sources state that these are a form of explosive reactive armour, ERA for short. This is possible, as retrofits of ERA are extremely common on tanks of the T-54-55 series. But, and I will admit to not being an expert on armour technology, I'm not so sure about the turret armour. While the smaller added armour boxes on the hull front do appear to be ERA, the bulk of the angled applique armour on the turret sides makes me wonder if they are a passive composite armour instead. It could be that the Vietnamese developed ERA, which would likely be designed with high-end Chinese missiles in mind, just needs to be that large to be effective against anticipated threat. But I'd prefer more details, which aren't likely to be forthcoming as the VPA is careful about what it releases on the T-54M. Also added are a form of slat and chain armour on the turret rear, designed to detonate incoming anti-tank missiles. This form of armour was used on the early Israeli Merkava tanks, and it probably comes as no surprise that the Israelis have played a major part in the program. Israeli military industries, now part of Elbit, were hired to develop the prototype for what would become the T-54M program. This model, designated the T-54M3, was also fitted with a NATO standard L7 105mm gun and a 60mm mortar. Common features in Israeli upgrades to their own tanks based on their extensive experience of armoured warfare. Interestingly, the VPA did not adopt these particular features. Instead, the T-54M upgrade retains the original D10T 100mm cannon which dates from World War II, though fitted with a thermal sleeve to provide better accuracy. The D10 is generally looked down upon as inferior to the L7, primarily in terms of anti-armour performance. But the decision to retain the 100mm makes sense. The VPA no doubt has vast stores of this ammunition in inventory, so bringing an entirely new weapon into service at this time would be hugely expensive. Besides, the VPA has already selected its future tank, the Russian-built T-90, which is equipped with a much more powerful 125mm cannon. Though only about 60 of these are in service at the current time, the VPA does intend to make this vehicle its main MBT once funding is available. So it's likely that the T-54M will not be expected to provide the primary anti-armour capability of the VPA, this instead being the responsibility of the T-90 and infantry weapons. The T-54Ms are probably envisaged as more likely in an infantry support role in the event of a war. For this, the 100mm high explosive shell is perfectly adequate, and the gun's armour-piercing abilities are good enough for most potential foes. The number of T-54Ms anticipated seems to bear this out. To date, it appears that 100 sets of the new fire control systems have been purchased and have either been fitted or are in the process of being so. The VPA states that an additional 200 sets are expected to be acquired in the future, for an anticipated total of 300 T-54Ms to be built. The rest of the T-54-55s and Type 59 fleet are expected to be moved into reserve status as the T-90s come into service. Though obsolescent, these will be replacing vehicles such as World War II era T-34s and Su-100s, as well as American vehicles captured from the South Vietnamese. And so, they will provide an improvement to the VPA reserve, but retain a lot of commonality with frontline equipment, something that makes eminent sense. A massive thank you to Lian Quan on Twitter for his help in making this video possible. If you have any interest in the current state of the Vietnamese military, here's a guide to look to as he posts regularly on all aspects of the subject, including the very latest news. I'll link to his Twitter in the description. Cheers for watching, and I'll catch you next time.